This is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine. Joe was a traveling salesman whose territory covered most of the Omega sector. He drove around hawking what he called quality merchandise. Dime store stuff, grav jigs, and time coders. Business had been pretty good for Joe. He was a sharp dresser and liked the ladies. And the ladies, they liked him back. One night he was heading in from his last call. The rain was coming down in torrents, and Joe was feeling as miserable as the weather. He was getting drowsy, so he went to a diner for some Java. There was a prowl car parked outside, a big one of those Kolokov anti-grav jobs imported from Minsk. Joe parked a few spaces away from it. He sure didn't want to mess with one of those. The cop was showing mugshots to the counter help as Joe entered the diner. The lawman eyed the huckster with suspicion as the night dripped from his coat. Joe sat down and placed his order. The cop sat at the counter, a few seats away from Joe, and ordered the usual. The waitress slid him his coffee and dunkers, the usual. Joe eyed the counter help. They sure didn't make him like her anymore. A little rusty around the edges, but pretty well preserved, considering her age. "You haven't seen anyone out walking, have you?" said the cop, giving Joe the eye. "On a night like this, not a chance." "Why?" asked Joe, between sips of his coffee. "Because the slasher just broke out of the joint." "The slasher? Wasn't he the guy who—" "Yeah," said the cop. They turned their attention to the steaming Java. Finally, the rain began to let up. Joe paid his tab and headed back out to his car. As he strapped himself in, he glanced back at the diner. The waitress was talking to the cop and pointing right at him. Joe watched as the cop turned around and locked his electro eye on him. Joe started the hover glide unit and the car thrummed to life. The cop climbed into his cruiser. The Kolokov's boosters lifted it into a pursuit stance, pulled out and followed Joe onto the road. Joe looked into the rearview mirror. The squad car was gaining, fast. Now, Joe wasn't a guy prone to panic. But what had the waitress said to send the cop after him, and why? The squad car kept coming. It was right on his bumper when the cherry top flashed and a siren started to wail. A sheen of cold sweat broke out over Joe's body. The waitress, it was her fault. You can never trust a robo, especially a robo dame. He'd been framed. Joe eased off the gas and pulled over. He lowered the window and waited, soaking in his cold sweat as the cop walked up to the car. What did she tell him? The policeman told him to get out of the car. "But, officer, listen," stammered Joe. "No!" Joe got out of the sedan. The cop looked him over, then reached for his neuroblocker. Joe froze, eyes wide open. Those things can really hurt a guy. The cop shoved Joe and leapt inside. There were the sounds of a scuffle, then a flash of purple light, and a body on the ground, twitching. The body of the guy who had been hiding in Joe's back seat. An escaped madman, the slasher. He'd been waiting for Joe. Hey, it's a true story. Happened to a friend of mine. And I heard that after that little incident, Joe made a special request to the company. A transfer to a desk job.